Welcome to the legacy of the werewolf myth, an exploration of one of the most iconic and chilling legends in human history. For centuries, the werewolf has captivated imaginations, stirred fear, and become a staple in folklore and pop culture. But what is it about this creature, part man, part beast, that has endured through the ages? In this documentary, we will trace the origins of the werewolf myth, explore its evolution, and analyze its portrayal in pop culture, from ancient civilizations to Hollywood blockbusters. To understand the werewolf, we must first go back in time, long before Hollywood, before silver bullets, and before the legends of full moons. The origins of lycanthropy, the condition of turning into a werewolf, can be found in the distant past of ancient Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. The earliest known accounts of human-animal transformations come from ancient Greek and Roman mythologies. The most famous early reference to a werewolf-like figure comes from the tale of Lycaon, a king from Arcadia, Greece. According to Greek mythology, Lycaon challenged the god Zeus by serving him human flesh, which led to Zeus punishing him by transforming him into a wolf. This story, recorded by the Roman poet Ovid in his Metamorphoses, is considered one of the first well-documented instances of a human turning into a wolf. The transformation here is seen as both punishment and a sign of the king's defiance against the gods. But Lycaon's story is just the beginning. Throughout Europe, myths about shape-shifting humans abound. In Norse mythology, the Viking sagas describe warriors known as berserkers, humans who could enter a trance-like state in which they would take on the ferocity of wolves or bears. The berserkers, though not werewolves in the modern sense, demonstrate the deep connection between human beings and animal spirits in ancient European cultures. However, the idea of the werewolf as we know it, someone who transforms under the full moon, loses control of their human nature and becomes a beast, emerges more distinctly in medieval Europe, during a time when superstition and fear of the supernatural were rampant. By the Middle Ages, Europe was entrenched in a battle between Christianity and pagan beliefs. In this turbulent period, the myth of the werewolf took on darker, more sinister connotations. In a world where witch hunts, religious persecution, and superstition thrived, accusations of lycanthropy, being a werewolf, became a serious matter. The term werewolf itself comes from the Old English wer, meaning man, and wolf, meaning wolf, emphasizing the dual nature of the creature, human and beast. One of the most infamous periods of werewolf hysteria occurred in the 16th and 17th centuries during the werewolf trials in Europe. In France, Germany, and Switzerland, hundreds of people were accused of being werewolves. The trials were often fueled by fear, superstition, and local folklore. The most famous of these trials involved the Beast of Gévaudan, a creature that terrorized southern France between 1764 and 1767. Witnesses described it as a monstrous wolf-like creature, and the local authorities, unable to stop the killings, were convinced it was a werewolf, or even a supernatural demon. In these trials, the accused were often tortured until they confessed to turning into wolves. Sometimes the punishments were brutal, including being burned alive or hanged. It's thought that many of these werewolf accusations were, in fact, a cover for other crimes or acts of superstition. Yet, they provide a chilling glimpse into the dark and dangerous nature of belief in lycanthropy. But the werewolf myth didn't remain confined to medieval Europe. It spread to other parts of the world. In Siberia, for example, the belief in the werewolf of the Tuvan people has been passed down through generations. Similar beliefs also found their way into North America, often blending with indigenous lore. The werewolf as we know it today with its full moon transformations and tragic fate, owes much to modern popular culture, especially the film industry. As early as the 1930s, Hollywood began to shape the iconic werewolf image, forever linking it to the silver screen. The 1935 film Werewolf of London, produced by Universal Pictures, was one of the first major films to portray a man who transforms into a wolf. But it was The Wolfman, 1941, starring Lon Chaney Jr., that truly cemented the modern werewolf archetype. In this film, the werewolf was depicted as a tragic figure, a man who transforms uncontrollably during the full moon and must grapple with the horrors of his own existence. In The Wolfman, the idea of the full moon as a trigger for the transformation was solidified. The film explored themes of guilt, loss of control, and the internal conflict between man and beast. These elements resonated with audiences and set the stage for how werewolves would be portrayed for decades to come. As the 20th century progressed, the werewolf myth adapted and shifted in various ways. The 1980s and 1990s saw a new wave of werewolf films that reflected the changing social and cultural climate. Films like An American Werewolf in London, 1981, and The Howling, 1981, brought a mix of horror, dark humor, and graphic effects that showcased the horrific transformation process in more visceral, realistic terms. The werewolf, once a symbol of tragic loss of control, began to be portrayed in ways that focused on the horror of transformation and the grotesque nature of the beast. But as with any cultural icon, the werewolf myth continued to evolve, shifting once again in the late 1990s and early 2000s as more media began to explore themes of identity, power, and transformation in new ways. In television and films like Buffy the Vampire Slayer and The Twilight Saga, the werewolf was no longer simply a villain or a tragic figure. Instead, werewolves were portrayed as complex characters, sometimes heroes, sometimes misunderstood, but always deeply human in their struggles. In Twilight, for example, werewolves are portrayed as a supernatural race with their own mythology, distinct from vampires, and their transformations are depicted not as curses, but as part of their natural being. This shifted the werewolf from a purely horrifying figure to a more nuanced character capable of love, loyalty, and even heroism. More recently, shows like Teen Wolf, 2011, have continued to examine the werewolf myth, focusing on young adults grappling with supernatural powers and the responsibilities that come with them. The werewolf in Teen Wolf is both a symbol of adolescence and the pressures of growing up, often representing the internal struggles of the main characters as they navigate their identities. And let's not forget the originals and the Vampire Diaries, where werewolves are integral to the supernatural politics of the world, portrayed as both allies and adversaries to vampires, and occasionally possessing their own unique set of abilities, further complicating the mythos. Why does the werewolf persist in our culture despite centuries of change and evolution? The answer, perhaps, lies in the symbolic power of the myth itself. The werewolf represents the fear of losing control, the conflict between our animal instincts and our civilizing influences. It speaks to the darker aspects of human nature, our capacity for violence, destruction, and chaos, and to our fear of the unknown. The myth of the werewolf taps into primal fears of the wild, the unknown, and the loss of identity. As society becomes more technologically advanced and the natural world seems further and further removed from our daily lives, the werewolf reminds us of the animalistic side of human nature, the part of ourselves we suppress, fear, or even embrace. From ancient myths of gods and kings to modern pop culture depictions, the werewolf has undergone a dramatic transformation. Once a symbol of fear and punishment, The werewolf today reflects our evolving views of identity, transformation, and the human condition. As we continue to explore the unknown, the werewolf will undoubtedly remain a creature of fascination, a symbol of the fine line between man and beast, civilization and chaos. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the legacy of the werewolf myth. Until next time, beware the full moon.